evening, ladies and gentlemen. In our company, of course, His Excellency, former President Kgalema Motlanthe, I'd like to greet you and welcome you to the 8th Annual Lot Ndlovu Lecture. By way of introduction, my name is Bongiwe Zwane, and it's an absolute honor and pleasure to be in the company of all of you tonight who are watching us. Usually in a setting like this, we'd be gathering and really celebrating this life well lived together, but albeit we're doing it virtually tonight, given the circumstances that we find ourselves in as the globe, but it doesn't deter us from remembering this life that stood for excellence, a life, of course, which was lived in full. Ubaba Lot Ndlovu was one who stood for ethical leadership and transformation in South Africa. His is a story of dedication. The headlines these days are not short of stories that highlight the leadership crisis that we are facing in South Africa. While some strides have been made in this regard, a lot more remains. If we still see millions being squandered instead of benefiting those who desperately need the assistance, then we should, of course, be worried. And transformation still remains one of the challenges that is faced by South Africa. And as the former Deputy Chief Justice Kgalema Motlanthe said at the inaugural lecture, that Ubaba Ndlovu was a visionary with courage of principle. He was described as the Saint Paul of the BMF cause and Black economic empowerment, while his twin, Ubaba Don Mkhwanazi, was called the Saint Peter of the BMF cause and Black economic empowerment. Now, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I would like to ask South Africa's first qualified Black chartered accountant, Chancellor of the University of Pretoria and Chairman of the Board of KPMG, to welcome us. Prof. Wiseman Nkuhlu, it's over to you.
Thank you very much, Program Director, for honoring us this way, taking charge of our proceeding this evening. It is my pleasure this evening to welcome former President Kgalema Motlanthe as our guest lecturer to the Lot Ndlovu, to deliver the Lot Ndlovu Lecture tonight. I salute also the President of the BMF, Andile Nomlala, and all the other BMF stalwarts, former president present today. I listened to former president of the BMF, Bheki Sibiya, announcing the renaming of the BMF building as Eric Mafuna House. We're very proud of that. It is in that spirit that we decided to honor Lot Ndlovu the way that we're doing tonight. It is really with great delight that I welcome the former president as our guest lecturer today. The history of BMF is very closely linked to the history of our country. BMF was born at the time when the struggle for freedom was really at its hour of intensity in 1976. And BMF worked closely with the liberation movement during that time. And when we attained freedom in 1994, it was time to partner with the government, the first democratically elected government in the country, to partner the government in ensuring that the democratization for our politics in the country is linked to the democratization of the economy. So our focus and advocacy has been in the area of democratizing the economy. We began this process, before 1994, of course. But the reason that I'm really pleased to honor Lot Ndlovu the way that we're doing tonight is that I had the privilege of being the president of the BMF in 1993, 1994. At the time, Lot Ndlovu was the chief executive. He had voluntarily given up employment to come and rebuild BMF and took the position as chief executive. So I had the privilege of working with him in actually working with the first government, democratic government in our country. The Minister of Labor at the time was Minister Tito Mboweni, that we first engaged him on the issue of making sure that there is advancement of Black people in managerial position, both in the public and the private sector. Those engagements led to the first legislation in this country on the question of employment equity. So Lot Ndlovu was really at the front of that engagement with the government, which ensured that we obtained that result. And then we took the program further on the question of advancing the democratization of the economy. The big one was to say, how do we now tackle participation of Black people in the economy? That's how then, under BMF, under his leadership, we started the conversation among ourselves on the issue of Black economic empowerment. I think the rest is history, that we achieved that, policy was adopted, and that was followed by actually legislation. So, but President Motlanthe, I'm sure you agree with us that much as we have made great progress as a country in terms of legislation, in terms of policies, establishing a sound foundation for democracy, for a non-sexist society, a society that really is inclusive. But we still face great challenges when it comes to implementing policies that make sure that we achieve the goals that are reflected in our constitution that we aspire to obtain. So we still face the challenge of having these policies in place, but when it comes to implementation, there are great challenges. As a country, we still face great challenges regarding transformation in the mainstream economy in particular. And a number of times, the presidents of BMF had found themselves forced to go and confront major companies in our country, where we felt that the gains of our freedom on transformation were being reversed. So I'm pleased that we continue on that path. But in addition to that, Mr. President, we are very concerned about the issue of ethical leadership. As it has been pointed out in the introduction, Lot Ndlovu was not just a champion, an advocate for transformation and making sure that there's meaningful participation of Black people in the economy. But in addition to that, he was a very ethical human being. He believed very strongly that we should not allow a situation where we use our freedom to only advance our interest, as the few who are fortunate to get leadership positions, either in government or in the private sector. So in other words, we should not use the freedom to advance our personal interest as the few who happen to be fortunate to be in leadership position. But we should use the positions that we have earned through the hard-fought struggle of our people to actually make sure that we use those positions to advance the interest of the more vulnerable and the majority of our people who are not fortunate to be participants in the mainstream economy. That challenge stands. The issue of making sure that as leaders in this country, in particular, the African people who are the majority and who exercise power in government, who have exercised power since 1994, it is really on our shoulders to make sure that we lead with integrity, with competence, and make sure that the power that we now have, we use it to benefit all South Africans to achieve the dream of an inclusive economy where everyone has got a share, and all of us be able to our lives to be enriched and improved by democracy. So today, Mr. President, we are confronted by the challenges that we have seen in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng. We are confronted by the evidence that we have been hearing through the Zondo inquiry, where not only white people, but Black people, people who should be in the age group that should be managers, that are managers in big organizations, both in the public sector and the government, public sector and the private sector, who are implicated in corruption and wrongdoing. So we feel that it is time that we pause every year to remember Lot Ndlovu, to remind ourselves that we have got a responsibility as leaders to lead ethically, to make sure that the freedom, we use it to benefit all South Africans, especially those who are less fortunate, less educated, who are the majority who are now unemployed. So today, Mr. President, you have been a role model in terms of the values that we talk about, in terms of the quality of leadership that we talk about. So we're really looking forward to hear your views, share your own experiences, and also learn from you as to how we as leaders, we can actually feel inspired and strengthened to strive even harder to really make sure that we use the positions that we hold of leadership to advance the interests of all South Africans. We lead with ethically and with competence, and we do not allow a situation where, as leaders, we are seen to be using our positions just to enrich ourselves. We look forward, therefore, Mr. President, to your contribution tonight. Thank you again for honoring us with your presence, and we salute you for your leadership, for the example that you have set in terms of how all of us should exercise our leadership position with honor and humility until the end of our careers. Thank you very much. We look forward, Mr. President, to your presentation. And of course, I hand back to the program director. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Indeed, those are words that should cause us to really ponder and reflect as the country saw in recent weeks the unrest in Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal, thus leading to the importance of the transformation conversation, especially because some of those who took to the streets were talking about issues of how they don't feel like they are part of the South African economy. So certainly, as we reflect then on the life of Ubaba Lot Ndlovu, we also look at another aspect, the aspect of partnerships. As you said, Prof, there, that he was somebody who partnered with the government of the day in order to make sure that the transformation agenda is thus realized. And partnerships are very important. And this next speaker is one of those who is critical in terms of partnerships to ensure that even events to pause and to reflect on such a life well lived are in fact a reality. In every journey, partnerships are also very critical, in fact, and they can determine how far you can go. When this next speaker not only believed in the vision of Ubaba Lot Ndlovu, but also as an organization, they believe then in the transformation agenda and also to ensure that South Africa and those who live in it do feel like they are part of the economy. She's the first Black woman to lead PwC Southern Africa. This is a huge deal, a very big deal for transformation around the Southern African region. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ms. Shelly Machaba, who is the CEO of PwC Southern Africa.
We're taught that 1 + 1 = 2. Simple, right? But today's world isn't simple. So, what happens if we look at it from a new angle? Could we make something greater? If we bring together human ingenuity, passion, and experience with the latest technology, we start to make something more. Something we can see in people's lives and feel in the world around them. Building trust for today and tomorrow. And that's the thing. We all know the math, but we need a new way to put it together. Which means we don't just find answers. We never stop looking for them. A passionate community of solvers, coming together in unexpected ways, creating new solutions for a new day. That's the new equation.
Thank you, Program Director. To the Lot Ndlovu family, His Excellency former President Kgalema Motlanthe, Prof. Wiseman Nkutlu, the Chairman of the Trust, BMF President, BMF Deputy President, the entire board, all former BMF presidents, all protocols observed. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. On behalf of PwC Southern Africa, it is once again my pleasure and privilege to welcome you to the 8th Annual Lot Ndlovu Lecture, presented by the Maduke Lot Ndlovu Legacy Trust in partnership with the Black Management Forum, and proudly sponsored by PwC. Speaking at the annual lecture is one of the highlights of my year, as it places me in the company of individuals who are committed to make a difference in our country. And in this challenging year, this is more important than ever. I would also like to take this opportunity to congratulate the BMF on celebrating its 45th year of existence this year. From humble beginnings in the very significant year of 1976, the BMF has grown into an organization that has played such a significant role in addressing the challenges of corporates in South Africa. Celebrating this anniversary under the theme of driving ethical leadership and socio-economic transformation is very appropriate, as these are two of the most important elements of inclusive economic growth and development. To all BMF, congratulations on this achievement and for all that you are doing for the people of our country. I look forward to seeing you contribute to grow from strength to strength. Ladies and gentlemen, as with last year, we once again convene virtually in a world that has dramatically changed over the past 2 years. Fundamental changes that are shaping our world include technological disruptions, climate change, fractured geopolitics, and the continuing effects of COVID-19 pandemic. At PwC, we have been analyzing global trends and having thousands of conversations with our clients and stakeholders around the world. And what's emerged from these conversations has been very interesting. People all over the world agree on two interconnected needs that they will face in the coming years. The first is to build trust, which has never been more important, nor more difficult. Organizations increasingly need to earn trust across a wide range of topics that are important to their stakeholders. Success depends on fundamental shifts in the way executives think, organizational culture, systems, and ambition. The second is to deliver sustained outcomes in an environment where competition and the risk of disruption are more intense than ever, and societal expectations have never been greater. Businesses need to change faster and more thoroughly to attract capital, talent, and customers. Too often, however, narrowly conceived transformation initiatives do not deliver the outcomes they promise. A new approach is definitely needed. Now, every organization will approach these challenges in the way that is most suitable to their unique circumstances and in a way that makes sense to them. At PwC, we have reshaped our global strategy and called it the new equation. By bringing our unique combination of capabilities together and matching it with serious investments and our commitment to quality, we can help clients unlock value for shareholders, stakeholders, and wider society. As PwC Africa, We are so excited by the opportunity that the new equation presents for our clients, our people, and other stakeholders, especially as we seek to deliver against our purpose in society, which is to build trust and solve important problems. In the reality that is the South African context, it's so important for all of us to be bound by common values and a strong purpose. We have seen how the spirit of the South African people has risen to the surface over the past month or so. When our country was rocked by unrest and violence, the stark reality of the hardship caused by the pandemic was exacerbated by the effect on our economy of the fortnight of unrest. Vaccine program took a knock. Investor confidence was sure to have been affected, loss of infrastructure, and along with it, employment. All of these are going to have a long-term effect. But as I mentioned, from the ashes of the destruction rose the ordinary South Africans who remain positive. We have seen mass cleanups, rebuilding, food drives, and donations towards communities that have been affected. As PwC, we sent food parcels to our own KZN staff who were affected by food shortages, and there are many such stories emerging. The spirit of Ubuntu has reminded us that we all have a role to play. As corporations, we have a responsibility to implement programs that contribute to the upliftment of our country. For instance, at PwC, we use the business skills we have, the knowledge we possess, and the tools at our disposal to promote greater opportunity for all in the areas in which we know we can make a difference. Our societal purpose strategy is firmly integrated into our business strategy and supported by our purpose and core values. We also know we can't be all in things to all people. So when we looked at where we needed to focus most, we were guided by the UN SDGs. And I'm proud to note that our African firm is already making a significant contribution to our key focus areas of good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, affordable and clean energy, decent work, and economic growth, reducing inequalities, and climate action. Some of our initiatives that support this are the following. I have no intention to really bore you with the details, but I just want to single out a few of them. Internally, our intent is to achieve 40% Black ownership and 30% female ownership by 2022. To achieve that, we have developed a 10-point plan supported by an activation program. All of our partners are aware of this, and their KPIs include transformation and gender equality specific KPIs. Progress on this plan is monitored regularly by both the leadership team and the board. Our latest partner admissions on 1 July saw 26 new partners across Africa being promoted. In the South African context, 50% of these were African, colored, and Indian. We also have a program where we support SMME initiatives because we know that SMMEs are really the backbone of the economy. This includes the Yes for Youth program. We also have been appointed as the external audit service providers for the Solidarity Fund, and this is pro bono. We also provide, professional services, besides external audit to the recently launched gender-based violence pro bono again. When it comes to good health and well-being, we recognize the impact COVID has had on our mental and overall well-being, and we have had regular surveys to see how our people are managing with this. The responses we got helped shape our talks and communications over the course of the year. It was important for us to let our people know that we truly do care about their well-being and that of their families. Again, another flagship initiative that was done recently, our forensics technology team provided support to business leaders, South Africa, and government in terms of the recent crisis situation experienced in South Africa. The team was involved in monitoring publicly available information from various platforms on a 24-hour basis. This entailed identifying relevant content to assist in managing the situation proactively. This is really a topic that is very close to my heart, and I could go on about all the wonderful initiatives that are contributing to our societal purpose. Transformation and societal impact initiatives in both the private and public sector needs to be driven by the right tone at the top from senior leaders, something that PwC is committed to doing, and for which I'm holding our leadership personally responsible and accountable. I'm pleased to note how well this aligned to the BMF's 45th anniversary theme of driving ethical leadership and socio-economic transformation. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, when people are involved in being part of the solution becomes a sustainable one. And at the end of the day, sustainable growth is what business is all about. As always, I commit that PwC will continue to play its part in supporting this process. I trust that you will enjoy the rest of the evening. Thank you very much, Program Director. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Machaba. As you talk about something very important, selflessness. It's not only about the ethics, but also being selfless as a leader, as we would have seen in recent days, how small businesses have been hardest hit by the looting incidents that have really taken place. And to hear that there are some initiatives that are supporting SMMEs is really one of those heartwarming moments in our country, because these are the people that need it more than anything in this moment, especially because if they are to drive the transformation agenda towards the direction that it needs to go. And really, as you talk about selflessness, I'm also thinking about the reflections of Lot Ndlovu, him just coming to serve the BMF and not even receiving a salary. It tells you of a man with a vision, and just how for him, this was a personal, vision that he wanted to be realized for South Africa. Now, when you really talk about the transformation agenda, it is something that definitely was close to his heart, and not only about building the trust, but also walking the talk in order to ensure that a lot of those in businesses are then supported through various initiatives. Thank you so much then for even touching on that all-important issue of female ownership, as well as Black ownership that you talk about as PwC, that you are now looking to move towards, because these are conversations that must be had in the country in order for the trust of those who are in the majority to begin to form again, to believe that South Africa could move towards the direction that it needs to. And thank you so much for joining us still for the 8th Annual Lot Ndlovu Lecture. Now you're wondering, who is this man that everyone is talking about, and talking about his selflessness, the leadership that he then showed at even some of the most difficult times in our country, someone who got involved, got his, really hands dirty, even at a time when South Africa had not even realized the democracy that you and I enjoy today. Let's then get a sense of who this man was as we take you through some of his videos from the mid-90s.
I'm going to cover 10 points very quickly without elaborating on them. We'll produce world-class organizations and a world-class economy. So we have to concentrate in our environment on issues of equity if we want to be world-class. Number two, we must detribalize and embrace a world view without losing specific, essential, traditional values. There is a cultural immigration that we must go through, and we were advised that we cannot afford to be slow as we do so. A quantum leap has to be undertaken in this cultural migration. We must detribalize, embrace a worldview without losing the essentials of our traditions. And we warned that tribalization is rearing its ugly head in this society, specifically with reference to African brothers from north of us here. Thirdly, that the government's economic policy framework here, growth, employment and redistribution, seeks to achieve higher levels of growth and a containment of unemployment as objectives, but that we should see here as the sharp end of the reconstruction and development program. In other words, in GEAR, we should address questions of poverty and inequality. Fourthly, that the successful achievement of affirmative action objectives requires a new activism, that we ought to be activists in the area of affirmative action and consciously resist and debunk some of the new social constructs that are developing, which may have the net effect of victimizing the disadvantaged people for the second time. And some of these stereotypes we ourselves are beginning to accept. And I don't want to go back to some of them which have been, in fact, confirmed by some of the speakers even here in terms of the assessment of the dynamics in the workplace, saying things which are critical of black people, which some of us have begun to accept, which really have to be questioned. But we'll move on and look for another opportunity some other day. Fifthly, 5, that the lack of responsiveness and caring in the economy will hinder productivity levels. That this economy is rather too jarred, too sharp, too irresponsive to the needs of the people. And we need to soften the kind of economy that we have if we're going to have any chance at all of raising levels of productivity and performance, therefore profitability of our organizations. 6, that the state should use the resources and processes at its disposal, such as the tendering process for development in terms of managerial development and skills development, leading to true ownership and true black economic empowerment, which must be underpinned by equity and participation by those that are involved, with specific reference to women. 7, that we need to revolutionize the education system in line with the demands and the needs of our economy and create and seek to create a balance, a healthy balance between the intellectual needs of the society and the technical needs or economic needs of our economy, of our society. 8, that technological advances and progress, whether it's in the area of IT, information technology or telecommunications, advances in these areas, as we embrace them, we must be in a position to contextualize them and understand and determine the extent to which they will impact positively on the whole society, bearing in mind the possibility of these advances marginalizing those sectors of the society that are vulnerable. 9, that the economy will not grow at a sustainable rate if we do not shed the ad hoc attitude that we have towards people development and skills development in the areas that count and are core to the running of the economy. That the individuals who fill these roles that are core and count in the running of the economy must adopt a transformational attitude and agenda. 10, that there are 2 main key challenges that face this economy, is to be a world-class economy with a full understanding of our own world, our own conditions, underpinned by equity. And secondly, that we have a higher responsibility to redeem the African continent as we seek to be a world-class player. And this necessitates the restructuring of our attitude towards our neighbors in the region and in Africa as a whole. The BMF should champion black economic empowerment as a concept and as a cause. To the same extent, without suggesting that it has achieved at that level, to the same extent and more as it did in the area of affirmative action. And that we will define into black economic empowerment the understanding that we have of affirmative action. And this has been elaborated on, and the BMF is a notable sort of protagonist of a particular view and is generally understood. And that this black economic empowerment that we must champion has to do with accessing and controlling capacity and capital for individuals, for companies as SMMEs, and for companies as major companies, including what is called black chips, these companies that are listed on the stock exchange. In other words, the spread would be that wide. And that there are 5 areas that would require specific attention in fulfillment of this cause. And this is the area of training and development, which is skills, the area of equity participation, which is the ownership of shares within companies. It is the area of joint ventures, the area of outsourcing and subcontracting, and lastly, the area of changing the management profile, which is the area that the Black Management Forum has been concentrating on. And that it is in all these areas that specific policies by government and specific interventions and programs by the private sector must be undertaken, which embrace the setting of targets in all these areas. So this is the resolution that has come out here. Secondly, and the last one, is that the BMF must establish a portfolio, a research and economics portfolio, which will serve the purpose of liaising with government and pronouncing, after having undertaken some well thought out work and assignments, even of a research and analysis nature, and comment on current developments and current issues, and provide that needed linkage with the public sector, with government in particular. Ladies and gentlemen, I think.
And that is the life then we have come to honor together as we reflect on the life of Ubaba Lot Ndlovu. As he speaks then about the research portfolio, which is very critical for government to be able to understand where it needs to go and where the priorities should be directed towards, and also speaking about challenges that are still spoken of on this day, and that is the containment of unemployment, poverty, and inequality. A man who stood for excellency, described as an ethical person who also exemplifies ethical leadership. But that moment then that we've all been waiting for, I'm sure a lot of you are really looking forward to getting some pearls of wisdom as we look to then get to the lecture and to understand just from the view of the speaker on what we should be reflecting upon tonight. And I'm not going to be doing that introduction myself this evening. I'd like to call upon the Deputy President of the BMF, Ms. Tasneem Fredericks. Over to you.
Good evening, Bongiwe. Thank you very much. Before I begin with this next important item that I am so privileged and honored to be doing this evening on this most esteemed and high platform, I'd like to wish His Excellency, the former President Kgalema Motlanthe, a very good evening, a warm evening to him. Mr. President, thank you for being here this evening, and thank you for gracing us with your presence. I also would like to acknowledge and greet Prof. Nkutlu, the BMF President Andile Nomlala, our very valued partner from PwC, Ms. Shirley. Always nice to see her, always nice to see her consistent support for the BMF through, whether it be through the trust or other initiatives. And then I think importantly, the reason why we are here, the Lot Ndlovu family who have joined us this evening. And I'd also like to convey our sincere condolences as the BMF. We understand that there was a passing of a very close family member. So may God give you strength and patience during your time of sorrow. I'd then also like to obviously welcome and greet the BMF board members, BMF members, and also BMF stalwarts, past presidents and deputy presidents, as well as the audience this evening for joining us. They say that great leaders show their greatness through action and not through words. So really this evening when I do my introduction, I must warn the audience and my colleagues that this is really an abbreviated bio of His Excellency, the former president. I'm sure that if, this was, a real introduction with all the accomplishments, we'd at least need an hour. But it just shows the humility that such great leaders have. And if I can just start the introduction by saying that, Mr. President, you worked for the Johannesburg City Council in the 1970s, possibly in management, what BMF stands for. You were recruited by Umkhonto Wesizwe, the then armed wing of the ANC. And then after 11 months detention in John Vorster Square Police Station in central Johannesburg, you were sentenced to an effective 10 years imprisonment in 1977, which you served on Robben Island. What a huge sacrifice for everybody in South Africa, and such an honor to have you here, to be able to thank you for your time that nobody can ever replace away from your family in isolation in Robben Island. And then obviously being released in 1987, you were tasked with strengthening the trade union movement while working for NUM, National Union of Mine Workers. In 1992, you were then elected as NUM's General Secretary and responsible for establishment of the Mine Workers Investment Company, the Mine Workers Development Agency, as well as the J.B. Marks Education Fund, which focused on the developmental needs of ex-mine workers, their dependents, and communities. You served 2 5-year terms as Secretary General of the ANC. You were President of the Republic of South Africa in September 2008 to May 2009, during which time you joined world leaders at G20 summits and other multilateral bodies to really respond to the global financial crisis that we've been talking about and hearing about. And then back in South Africa, you worked with business, labor, and civil society to minimize the impact of the crisis on the South African economy. I must tell you, Mr. President, that as BMF, we've made extensive input into the national minimum wage. So when it was introduced by legislation, we were one of the parties that made that input, and we were quite excited and happy that it was implemented as legislation. And I think implementation is ongoing. We're never going to, and I think the start at the basis of this great democracy that you personally fought for in liberating all South Africans was to have this excellent pieces of legislation as a starting point. And so our progeny, our children and great-grandchildren who come after us will still be, eating of the fruits of your and other revolutionaries, your labor and your sacrifice. You were then appointed by the Deputy President, Jacob Zuma, President Zuma, who held, you were appointed by President Zuma as the Deputy President and held this position until May 2014. You now head your own foundation, the Kgalema Motlanthe Foundation, which you've been established and which you still run. I just want to conclude with the words of Lot Ndlovu in his book, Lot Speaks, where Lot says, and I paraphrase, South Africa not only belongs to those who live in it, but I think more importantly to those who love it. So in those words, President Kgalema, we hand over to you, and we wait with bated breath to hear these pearls of wisdom that we are sure you're going to be dispensed. Thank you so much for being here this evening.
There we are. Thank you very much, Tasneem Fredericks, for your warm words of welcome and introduction. I've had the dubious honor of having to listen to my obituary being read under pretext of being introduced. So I thank you for your brief, benign introduction. Program Director, Ms. Bongiwe Zwane, Ndlovu and the Ndlovu family, the chairman of Maduke Lot Ndlovu Legacy Trust, Professor Wiseman Kutlu, the president of Black Management Forum, Mr. Andile Nomlala, the CEO of PwC Southern Africa, Ms. Shelly Machaba. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I thank the Maduke Lot Ndlovu Legacy Trust and the Black Management Forum for inviting me to deliver this annual lecture on the life and times of Lot Ndlovu. This is a singular honor and privilege for me to address you in memoriam of our leader, brother, and comrade, Lot Ndlovu. Lot Ndlovu, whom we remember, celebrate, and draw lessons from at this annual lecture, was a universal man with a benevolence as expansive as the cosmos. He was a free thinker, skilled in various disciplines, who was as comfortable talking about hard numbers in the bottom line as he was about conversing in matters of philosophy and sociology. His warm heart and curious mind created a space and an environment conducive to wide-ranging knowledge in many fields. His was a spirit that referred to human beings collectively, a compassionate and humane totality that brought about fundamental solutions to the problems of the day. As we understand it, the universe itself is an aggregate of all things, the totality of everything across space, including the earth itself. But when considering what it is that allows for habitable conditions for plants and animals, we are given the opportunity to discover the natural phenomena of the world. A complex combination of air, water, and soil, elements that blend and brew to imbue a primordial soup in a delicate balance that allows for life on earth. Such phenomena is well articulated by Gordon Childe in his seminal book entitled Man Makes Himself in the following words, and I quote, "Man's emergence on earth is indicated to the archaeologists by the tools he made. Man needs tools to supplement the deficiencies of his physiological equipment for securing food and shelter. He is enabled to make them by the delicate correlation of hand and eye, rendered possible by the constitution of his brain and nervous system," close quote. In simple terms, the intricate survival and development of society is a function of securing food and shelter by acting upon nature. Arguably, this is the essence of the creation and evolution of technology for productive economic activity. The story of tools in the narrative of humanity is very much the story of the accumulative development of technology in modern terms. Another precarious balancing act that gives way to an ecosystem of human activity that can either transform us or destroy us. In South Africa, at the forefront of the transformation landscape is the Black Management Forum, a well-established organization that is to be commended for representing the cause of Black professionals and executives in top managerial positions in the corporate world. With their strategic focus that emphasizes the implementation of the Employment Equity and Affirmative Action Acts, the BMF continues to work towards producing well-trained Black professionals who are able to help transform the socio-economic ecosystem of the country. The BMF's ongoing hard work reminds us all that positive action, no matter the size, can have a catalytic impact on the balance of our collective vision. Among the early leading lights of the BMF was Lot Ndlovu, whose valuable and outstanding contributions to the organization brought about a focused confidence and determination to achieve broad and meaningful change. Understanding the influence and impression that the private sector has to play in effecting societal change is a notion that Lot Ndlovu succinctly captures as being at once an individual and collective responsibility. In his own words, Lot Ndlovu said, and I quote, "The connection is critical in that the influence that business has on the lives of the community is overwhelming. And so those whose hands are on the levers of power in businesses ought to tremble each time they exercise their responsibility, because what they do now affects eventually the community out there," close quote. And it is a community out there that in turn affects the economic structure of society. Through our lived experience on the ground, we observe how the material conditions determine our consciousness. This leads to the understanding that communities are inspired by different pressures and objectives, both in our recent past and present. The historical context we refer here covers the era of apartheid with its racially based discrimination that penetrated all facets of life, as well as the corollary struggle for a humane socio-economic system. Repression opposed by resistance, fascist brutality opposed by fierce determination and resilience, white supremacy opposed by the just cause for freedom. Something was boiling beneath the surface. A disorder of famine and hardship, burning like lava and pushing through cracks and fissures of the bedrock of South Africa. An urgent sense of uneasy impatience, fueled by a latent panic that underpinned the doubt, despair, and distress of millions of people. Simmering with a toxic mix of economic, political, and social discontent, the mountain of struggle exploded into protests that spewed massive columns of anti-establishment smoke and ash across the skies of South Africa. Protesters looking for food and freedom, police shooting at youth, the blood of the poor shed, an outpouring of public anger, the fingers of perceived corruption pointed in every direction, international criticism, a call for lasting change and reforms promised. And that was on the eve of the democratic dispensation in 1994. The volcanic activities leading up to 1994 were in the pursuit of a just and noble cause, whereas the recent happenings of last month were but mere riots. And in the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and I quote, "The limitation of riots, moral questions aside, is that they cannot win and their participants know it. Hence, rioting is not revolutionary but reactionary because it invites defeat. It involves an emotional catharsis, but it must be followed by a sense of futility," close quote. We are told that tensions are beginning to die down and that the aftermath of mass unrest, the country faces new concerns, namely a disaster management program and a fiscal meltdown that will no doubt have further ramifications on the poorest members of society. However, it is important for us to remember that the tensions are still incredibly high and at a boiling point. The tension of a mother unable to feed her family, the tension of millions of young men and women unable to find a job, the tension of business owners wading through the mud of the country in junk status, the tension of a child unable to access an education and the internet, the tension of political mistrust, the tension of gender-based violence lurking around every corner, the tension of food insecurity, and the tension of humanity facing a global pandemic, to name but a few. These tensions are not beginning to die down. On the contrary, they are only rising. The need for survival of families, further exacerbated by rising poverty and agitated by the grief of COVID-19, has fueled this ongoing sense of rage below the surface. But the accidents of history are sometimes not accidental at all. And it is crucial that we pause, take a step back, and look at the bigger picture. By doing this, we give ourselves the space to ask some pertinent questions on what has changed South Africa in ways that we can learn from. The Mapungubwe Institute for Strategic Reflections recent summit on the Ndlulamity scenarios and economic modeling offers some scientific insight into the lived experience of South Africans through research and quantified data to understand what needs to be done to save South Africa's people from injustices. The scenarios paint a picture of a pre-COVID South Africa that was already in precarious circumstances, accompanied by job losses and the anticipation of further economic decline that was already entrenched in the psyche of the nation. While the current global focus is on recovering from COVID-19, the studies show that South Africa has neglected some of its existing threats and solutions, and one such oversight is the influence of the private sector on the recovery and healing process of the country. As the compound effect of multiple crises gush onto the harsh historic weaknesses, the promise of nation building and inclusive economic growth become somewhat out of reach. The people of South Africa are being continually inflicted by the pangs of poverty, which are exacerbated by rampant corruption, seemingly with no consequences for the culprits. So, what is this subterranean tyranny on the people of South Africa? A cruelty of seismic proportions that seems to endure through the ages and now coupled with crises that widen underlying fault lines. All of these calamities were matched by fierce determination to usher in democracy. Program Director, we now all enjoy universal suffrage and are in the course of building a united, democratic, non-racial, non-sexist, and a prosperous South Africa. We call upon all those in positions of power to pledge their help and active citizenship as a symbol of renewal, to embrace a South African identity that promotes social cohesion, democracy, and human rights, to advance economic transformation and participation of the people. However, the absence of national discourse around our humanitarian heritage robs us of realizing the values that are enshrined in our Constitution, values and ethics that guide us when we struggle to find good leadership, values that we uphold in the knowledge that only through united and concerted effort can we prosper. If we adopt a historical approach in our work, we no doubt notice how this timeline highlights the persistence of inequality, revealing dimensions of ongoing economic and exploitative imbalances. And by assessing our past and its reflection on our present, we also examine our conscience and the efforts we have made or not made as leaders to foster equitable and inclusive growth in the lives of all people. Despite the progress made in the era of democracy, what progress has been made in understanding why a lack of economic transformation has persisted and even escalated since 1994. This continuum of poverty and lack of entrepreneurial access to capital is a glaring expression of our failures as leaders. And in the words of James Baldwin, and I quote, "History is not the past, it is the present. We carry our history with us. We are history. If we pretend otherwise, we literally are criminals, close quote. With the words of James Baldwin's encouragement, let us go back in time for a moment and explore the lessons of our history. But how do we understand this perpetual violence, the exploitative nature of capitalism and corruption, the racial exclusion and ongoing economic inequality experienced by the majority of South Africans? Since we have taken a step back to view a wider context to the situation, allow us to take our cue from Lord Ndlovu's career and conviction, and let us try to unpack what we mean by ethical leadership and a commitment to service in order to interpret concretely what it means to be personally transformed and what it means to contribute to the empowerment of the people. Throughout his active participation as a corporate leader, Lord Ndlovu personified the idea of unity in action and represented a detachment of liberation fighters that did not distinguish between their professional work and political outlook. There was no distinction between his work as a business leader and his principled attitude towards uplifting the nation. Economic emancipation to Lord Ndlovu was a concept of the collective, not an avenue for self-enrichment. Entrepreneur, executive, mentor, manager par excellence, humanitarian, and former president of the Black Management Forum, Lord Ndlovu's devotion to lifelong learning is an image in the evolution of African intellectualism. His understanding of purpose-driven productivity, critical thinking, and introspection were pathways for his innovative approach to problem solving and a mindset that pioneered Black economic empowerment. His discipline of education and out-of-the-box thinking are some of the tools needed to innovate and invent ourselves out of future crises. His ability to strategize and use the aptitude of the mind were his weapon of choice, a choice that inspires so many of us to inquire further, to go beyond what we think we know, and to discover truth. Lord Ndlovu's command and skill of study, scrutiny, and solution cultivated a certain freedom of thought within his ambit of consciousness. His deep thinking and led to focused and meaningful action. It is here in his humanity where his advocacy for Black economic empowerment was a driver for change in transformation policy. His sensitivity to the limitations of BEE affirmed his sentiments around the importance of developing genuine transformation that includes the majority of the people. As we remember Lord Ndlovu, we recognize that his contributions open a window to the history and accomplishments of economic transformation in South Africa. This window offers us a viewpoint to commemorate and appreciate the lineage of Black citizens and freedom fighters who struggled and contributed to the development of economic empowerment within our democracy. If it thus remains important for us to reflect on the perspective of equal economic participation over the past 3 decades. Collectively, we need to identify the obstacles that continue to restrict the effective and sustainable implementation of inclusive growth and equitable distribution of wealth. As leaders, we hope to make sense of the long distance ahead in achieving progress. It is through dialogue and platforms such as BMF's Annual Lot Ndlovu Lecture, where the private sector, public sector, and civil society are offered important opportunities to map out a future. These discussions allow us to test the application of these policies and further drive the agenda of transformation on an evolving basis. Championing economic empowerment in South Africa is significant in its strength to contribute towards realizing the macro vision of equitable and inclusive growth. Tackling the widespread concern about the scale and consequences of inequality and addressing the failure of economic growth at a grassroots level are the touch points to engage in this forum. When considering the milestones on this complicated path, it must be recognized that in order to achieve anything of significance, people should come first. This is a principle that Lot Ndlovu championed for employers, employees, young entrepreneurs, and all stakeholders. People should not be left out, marginalized, or unheard. People do not only have concerns, complaints, and requests, but they also have suggestions. They need to be heard and considered. Lot Ndlovu was cognizant of the value of listening and giving a voice to those who are often unheard. In his sensitivity to the entire business supply chain, as well as the end user, Lot Ndlovu understood the importance of reflection and analysis to learn the lessons needed to improve business practice in the quest to strengthen social cohesion. Acknowledging the weaknesses of business policy are small steps towards sustaining a constitutional democracy. Lot Ndlovu was a leader who took giant steps in this regard. However, the market price of lessons learned by the public sector and private sector are open to debate. How far the needle has moved in the economic landscape is a cost to the poorest, with an expenditure sheet that lists the expenses of the monopolistic tendencies of even the most altruistic businessmen. A yawning gap to traverse and the mounting impatience with rising unemployment and worsening income inequality sometimes obscures our vision of the pathway forward. Understanding Lot Ndlovu's trajectory is to appreciate his context. Like his colleagues and peers, and like all of us, Lot Ndlovu is at once a product and creator of history, a child of his environment that shaped his impulse, responses, and reactions. South Africa was and is a country that faces a constant crisis of leadership. And it is within these ethical crises that Lot Ndlovu's model of leadership shone bright. His was a model of contextual leadership. He had the humility to accept that perhaps for far too long, we may have been wrong in how we measure and prescribe leadership. His honesty exposed that it is not merely one's attributes that makes one a successful leader. Rather, he understood leadership as an instrument to create a context in which others are enabled to succeed. To him, true leadership was an expression of empathy, integrity, and morality, where he became what his team and the people of South Africa needed him to be at the time. To ignore context is to ignore the data and hence the truth. And the glaring question that then stares us all in the face is, are we the leader that our team and our country need us to be at this time? Some may say that there is no way of effectively quantifying context, but luckily, For South Africa, we have a guidebook that evaluates the steadiness of the hand of those in power. Trample not, some may tell you, but at your own peril, our leader, Lot Ndlovu, would certainly assert. For society to collectively steer through uncertain times, we rely on an ability to navigate with a moral compass that encourages public service and civic responsibility as fundamental building blocks for socio-economic cohesion, human development, and a robust, inclusive future. Through the BMF and similar platforms for dialogue and change, individuals and communities are given a chance to embody the values and spirit of leaders such as Lot Ndlovu, Jabu Mabuza, Don Mkhwanazi, Eric Mafuna, Beki Sibia, Ruel Koza, JB Magwaza, Don Mncube, Fred Paswana, Gibson Tula, Nolita Fakude, and their peers. Theirs is a mirror through which we must reflect ourselves, draw our inspiration and moral ascendancy. They breathed life into and walked the values of our Constitution. The principles within our Constitution are therefore sacred. They underpin the social values that leaders such as Lot Ndlovu lived by and serve as a guide to an individual's actions, beliefs, and emotional system. To quantify context is to appreciate that an individual cannot be separated from the broad society she or he is a part of. We see ourselves in each other through shared values. They bring legitimacy to the rules and laws that govern us. They are the essence of what it takes to create social cohesion and an inclusive future. Returning to the sirens of danger beneath the surface, alarming us to the constant threats that the people face, these warning signs ask us to examine the unfulfilled promise of freedom through the prism of social, economic, and political decay. Against this suffering, we are reminded now in Women's Month, more than ever, that gender discrimination deepens the roots of impoverishment, which imposes a disproportionate burden on women. While both men and women suffer in poverty, gender discrimination means that women have far fewer resources to cope, are likely the last to eat, and the least likely to access education, healthcare, equal pay, and the respect that they deserve. What must be highlighted, amplified, and placed at the center of discussions at the Black Management Forum and across society is the fact that having more women in leadership positions could set South Africa, and indeed the world, on a more sustainable path. Women have proven to be leading the way towards more equitable and sustainable solutions to climate change. Women tend to share more information about community well-being and are more willing to adapt to environmental changes as their family lives are impacted. And women often take the first step in recognizing the power they have to effect change through their roles, not only in business, but also in their homes, communities, government, and environment. Contextual leadership is very much the domain of women. By bringing gender equality to business management positions, grows the country's economy and creates new vistas of opportunities through equal pay and safe spaces for women in the workplace to boost the private sector and advance the potential for prosperity. Sensitive to the time we are in and the kind of leadership that the country needs, Lord Ndlovu's conviction would echo the sentiments of Women's Month and the need for women to lead from the front. Using one's privilege as a leader and in business is a lesson to be learned on moderating our egos and conceit, undermining our weaknesses, and reinforcing our strengths. It is of our peers and mentors that we must ask the most difficult questions. What Lord Ndlovu taught us is that he was never a man who asked of others what he was not prepared to undertake himself. And so it is in his spirit and in the heart of the BMF that we should all ask ourselves the following question. What are we prepared to do to achieve good for all people? And how do we close the gap between our social values, our actions, and beyond? As I conclude, allow me, Program Director, to leave you with the refrain from the lyrics of Desiderata, which reportedly was found in Old St. Paul's Church in Baltimore, dated 1692. And I quote, "Beyond a wholesome discipline, be gentle with yourself. You are a child of the universe, no less than the trees and the stars. You have a right to be here," close quote. That was the Lord Ndlovu we knew and so revered, a man that belonged to the universe and who did not need validation, for he knew that he belonged. And I thank you for your attention and refer back to our Program Director. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Mr. President. That really left us with quite a lot to ponder this evening as we really reflect on the life of this free thinker, as you've described him, a skilled in various disciplines, warm-hearted, curious mind. His was a spirit that reflected human beings collectively. I'm borrowing from some of what you've said to us tonight and really just getting us to think long and hard about where everything is and where the country is finding itself at the moment. And what you also reflected on is the importance of these three scenarios that we've seen being painted by Intlulamiti, the Kwarakwaras, a floundering false dawn, which is where we are finding ourselves and hoping to at some point get to a nation that is in step with itself in Naile Walk. And thank you so much for really just helping us to reflect on where South Africa is and answering the critical question of social cohesion and whether or not it is to be attainable by 2030, as you talk about those then who are still going to bed hungry, who are still trying themselves to be able to be part of this dynamic economy that Ubaba Lot Ndlovu would have fought for and even hoping for this nation to then achieve. I'd like them to call on somebody who transformation is very close to his heart. And he is someone who really preaches it in everything that he does. He's always talking about transformation and the importance then of where South Africa should find itself when it comes to the transformation space. He is the president of the Black Management Forum, Mr. Andile Nomlala, as we look then at the BMF 45 years on, 45 years more years of transformation. It's over to you.
Good evening, Bongiwe. and thanks for having me. Let me first start by greeting His Excellency, the former President of the Republic of South Africa, Kgalema Motlanthe. And thanks for a mouthful of a lecture, which reflected and reminded us of our luminaries in the BMF, President Lot Ndlovu. We know that we walk in the path of the giants, and we know that in the BMF, we came in as a leadership in the solid foundations that were created by the likes of Lot Ndlovu. For me, before I say any word, I must first greet the former presidents of the Black Management Forum who are here tonight, President Nolita Fakute, President Begis Bia, President Mthunzi Mncane, President Bonang Mohale, President Eric Mafuna, and I must greet the Deputy Presidents of PMF, that the former Deputy President of PMF, Meko Kokumalo, Deputy President Tumisani Mpafa. And it's important that I mention that the past stalwarts. And I must, before I went further, I must greet my dependable Deputy President, Tasnim Fredericks, and I see my colleagues in the board, they have joined us. And Monde, we want to thank you once again from your family, as the leader of the family now, to say that without you as the family allowing us to every year at this time, it wouldn't be possible for us to reflect as an organization, to look back and realize where we come from, so that we can act with extreme clarity of where we want to go. We do understand, Monde, that it would never be a time, and we would never reach a time where we would stop revering over your father. He was a giant. He built and solidified the name called Black Management Forum. We are forever grateful. We'll forever be indebted to his work. I think not just the family of BMF, but the South Africa at large owes its being today, the democratic dispensation we have, the lack that we realize in the economic doldrums that we find ourselves in. We owe it to ourselves that every once in a while, we must think and realize where and what would have been if Babu Lot Ndlovu was here. For me, is not to bring in a lecture, as the president or the former president of the Republic had given us a lecture, but it would be amiss of me if I don't, for a moment, reflect of where we are as a country, President Motlanthe. And you're one of the few people, when I say the few, it's because not millions of you were incarcerated in Robben Island. You're one of the few, which were probably thousands or hundreds of yourselves that were incarcerated in Robben Island. At some point in my time, I spent 3 nights in Robben Island in Cape Town. And I looked at the environment where somebody could have spent 10, 15, or even 27 years in that concentrated area. And when I look and think, what would have been the cause? What would have been the ultimate price of that cause? And I look at the government that is governing us today, and I realize that unfortunately and sadly, we are in a period and in an environment where our own liberators have become our worst enemies. And it's an unfortunate scenario where we would have hoped that if we were freed from the chains of apartheid and the chains of a long-standing history of colonialism, we would have hoped that our forebears would have built and created an environment that we as the younger leaders in our country will thrive from. But to me and the rest of us in the Black professional realms in our country, it looks like we are in a situation where people feel that let's rubbish the situation that we have created. It's a sad environment that we have leadership in our country, and we have political leadership, to be more precise, that has compromised every value, every possibility, and every necessity that is needed to build a base of a capable state that can deliver economic inclusion, that can deliver economic transformation. It's sad that it's our own grandfathers, it's our own liberators that have incarcerated us into the economic abysmal that we find ourselves in. In the words of US hip-hop group called The Dead Press, in their lyrics, I quote, "I'm not a hunter, but I'm told that in the places like the Arctic, where indigenous people sometimes might hunt a wolf, they take a double-edged blade and they put blood on the blade, and they melt the ice and stick the handle in the ice so that only the blade is protruding, and that a wolf smells the blood and wants to eat, and it will come and lick the blade trying to eat. And what happens is when the wolf licks the blade, of course, he cuts his tongue and bleeds, and he thinks he's really having a good thing, and he drinks and he licks and he licks, and of course, he is drinking his own blood and he is killing himself." I close quote. This is, President, the typical picture that we have of the corruption we find in our own ruling party. People who have no shame, that could steal and be ready to filter and line their pockets, even at the pandemic that is catastrophic across the world, that has killed and compromised families in our country, the vulnerable, the poor, everybody. But people still find an opportunity and a moment to use that to filter and pillage the coffers of the state. Our state, as we speak, President, is bankrupt. Our state coffers have been depleted, not by the efforts of trying to deal with COVID, but has been depleted by the biggest looters than the ones we saw last month. The biggest looters we have in our country are the ones that dress like me, who wear suits, who sits in air-conditioned offices and decide to collapse the state and orchestrate a systemic way of collapsing the state. But as Black professionals, we bear not to cry and drown in the environment of what we find ourselves. We remain hopeful. We are aware, and we believe that we are one of the few groups in our country who has somehow derived the democratic dividends that we enjoy. It is therefore our responsibility to take leadership and take charge and try to build a country that we all want to be in. It is in that breath where BMF says that it is the time now we need to build and create an economic recovery and expansion command council, a council that would look at nothing else but the economic problems that we have, a council that on a daily basis and a weekly basis and a monthly basis would report and create an environment where all the bottlenecks and all the stifleness that you find in the economy, be it the the efficiencies that you find in municipalities, the inefficiencies that you find in state-owned enterprises, where all those efforts we could put capable, ready to deliver, well-trained, top-class professionals that can study and analyze the economic crises, the bottlenecks, the stifleness, all the unnecessary hindrances that are there in our economy that could make the possibility that our economy starts developing and creating opportunities for the poor, start creating jobs, eliminating the contraction that we're currently at. And all of that, we'll build it up, we'll build a solid business case for it. The President of the Republic, in our own 45th birthday celebration, said that he is prepared now more than ever to receive unsolicited proposals from Black professionals that could create an enabling environment for the economy of our country to thrive. We know that in our midst, in the membership of BMF, we have the cream of the crop, be it corporate finance, capital raising, project finance, and everything that is needed for the economy to be put in a nice and a proper pedestal for it to thrive. And as the BMF, we think that we will hold that responsibility. We would not cry and drown in the mercy of the darkest hours that our country is at. We will rather look at the smaller gleam of light in the far end, and we crawl and thrive towards that direction. And we commit that at that time, we won't be seeking approvals from anyone. At that time, we will take the responsibility of owning up to the mess that our country is at and starting to bring lasting and progressive solutions to the problems of our country. Bongi, with those few words, we say to the Lot Ndlovu family, we know that these suggestions that we're putting forward would have been the ideal suggestions that President Lot Ndlovu would have mentioned. It would be the suggestions that President Lot Ndlovu would have lived by. It would be suggestions that President Lot Ndlovu would have committed his time, his energy, his mind to it. And we say to all Black professionals, let's rise up. The time is now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nomlala. And you mentioned something very critical there. It's not only going to be for us to lament the current state of our economy, but we have to be part of the solution then to try and bring it up. As you say that this committee that you're talking about is very critical, especially in a country where we're seeing such a high number of young people who are unemployed, who are hoping to be able to be given some kind of opportunity of either running their business and being able then to be part of the active economy. So it's up to us as well, as we reflect tonight, to really look at what you're talking about as a country. And these are solutions to where we are finding ourselves, because only talking about what is going wrong is not going to make things, any easier. And as Bob Lot always said, when you listen back to some of his messages, he talks about that dynamic vision that really needs a reconfigured economy, a reinvigoration of just us as society in order to be able to assist one another to uplift the country. Certainly, you're leaving us with words and challenges to ensure that even in our own little spaces, we are trailblazers who are setting things on fire for others who are hoping then to be able to get going. But there's a man here among us who has the difficult task of forging ahead and ensuring that the legacy of Bob Lot remains alive, that we know about him, we hear about him, but at the same time, we ensure that those who are in management positions are living his words and really taking to heart what he was talking about. I'm talking about Mr. Monde Ndlovu, who is going to really be speaking to us about his reflections as we are talking about someone who he not only knew from a distance, but someone he knew very closely. Monde, it's up to you.
Good evening, colleagues. Thank you, Program Director. You put me under too much pressure there. I don't know what you're expecting. but I take the challenge. His Excellency, former President Kgalema Motlanthe, good evening. Professor Wiseman Kuhlu, good evening. BMF President Andile Nomlala, BMF Deputy President Tasneem Fredericks, stalwarts of the BMF on the platform. I see former President Mzwanele Manyi has posted there in the group saying he is here, President. So we acknowledge you there as well, former President, and many other former stalwarts who are part of this great movement of transformation in the BMF. A very good evening to you, evening to my family, PwC as well, Shelly Machaba. Good evening to you too. I don't have a lot to say. I think the former president has succinctly put his points across. I think his reflection has been outstanding, very deep, very focused, really a statesman address tonight, and we have a lot to learn. I think it's also incumbent on us to further reflect again and listen to his address again, line by line, piece by piece, and really begin to unpack it line by line. I think just to briefly reflect, there's three questions that I want to just paint this canvas very quickly of my father. Three questions I think drove his lessons when he dealt with us as his children, not just his immediate children. We always believed that he's not just our father, but every child has a father, which includes himself as a father. And so it's also his responsibility as a man, when he steps out of the nuclear family, that he remains a father to those outside of the nuclear family. And so these are the three daunting questions that I think drove his lessons. The first question is, what do you want? What do you want? And he always, when he dealt with us, he always pushed us to think for ourselves. He wanted us to develop personal agency. He wanted us to be critical. He wanted us to answer that question, what is it do you want for your life? He often refused to answer that question for us. Ultimately, when you'd put him in a corner and you'd say to him, if you were in my shoes, what would you do? And then he would answer and say, well, if I were you, this is what I would do. But when the debate begins, it doesn't begin with that. He begins with what is it that you want? And you need to know what you want. And I think that question, that first question, extends itself to the current state of the country, the current state of the Black lobby groups specifically, represented tonight through the BMF. You've got APSIB, you've got APASA, you've got the Black Lawyers Association, you've got a plethora of the Black lobby groups. The question is, what do we want? What do we want to see? And that should drive us to have a unified voice, a unified approach in doing things and not an isolated approach. So what do we collectively want? The second question is, what have you learned? Which is also another daunting question. You know, at oftentimes when you'd engage him, he would ask you, you'd have a debate in question format. And in that debate in question format and not answering, he was trying to provoke and instill in us a sense of accountability, because what have you learned unpacks the sense of accountability, and not just to act irrationally, but to think critically and ask ourselves, what am I learning? When you fail, the question is, what have you learned? And I know that the broader stalwarts of the BMF subscribe to these principles as well, because they also like asking some of these questions. What have you learned, or what are you learning in this process? And again, with the Ndlulamiti scenarios which President Kgalema Motlanthe has alluded to, and those of us on the platform who've gone through some of those approaches, it's exactly that question: what are we learning, and have we indeed learned from history, and what kind of a country are we going to have by the year 2030, according to their research? So it is a critical point of reflection. What have we learned? And the last question, critical question: what will you do about it? What will you do about it? And that is the bottleneck. One of the greatest bottlenecks of leadership is, what are we going to do about what we've learned, about what we want? And that should be the focal point. And that is why we have the lecture. That is why we still have the BMF. What are we going to do about it? We are going to advocate for socioeconomic transformation. What are we going to do about it? We are going to advocate for the development of Black managers and leaders and have a critical mass of those leaders. When we look at some of the statistics which are shocking from an education point of view, the Department of Higher Education released a report in March of this year showing us that 6% of the adult population have degrees. 6% of the adult population have diplomas. 3.4% have TVET college certificates. Now, this is a daunting task. And those who are part of the Black middle class, because they move in different circles and their worldview is shaped by the new environment, begin to feel like that is the new South Africa. But when you look at the actual numbers on the ground, you can see that we're still quite far away from even reaching the critical mass. Just the last part of statistics I just want to throw our way. When we look at the Commission for Employment Equity's latest report, and of course we look at the headline statistics, but when you look at the deeper side of it as to where the statistics are lying in terms of representation of African men and African women, when we look at the private sector in terms of the business types, in top management, African men are sitting at 8.1%. African women are sitting at 4.6%. In senior management, African men are sitting at 11.3%. African women are sitting at 6.7%. In middle management in the private sector, African men are sitting at 18%. African women at 13.4%. In junior management, African women in the private sector are sitting at 21%, and African men are sitting at 33.5%. So we can see that there's something happening in the private sector when you move further up into the top three stratas of leadership. And when you look at the report, you can actually tell what is going on. They move outside of the private sector and fill other business types. And as we know that the private sector is business, government is not business. Government creates a conducive environment for business. So if the private sector contributes over 70% of gross domestic product in the country annually, but you're looking at these numbers in terms of representation and decision-making, the report tells us that whites and Indians in the top two are the ones that are promoted, that are geared, that are recruited for those positions. And so when we talk critical mass, we've got to focus it even more in the private sector. We don't have that critical mass. So we're encouraging the work of the BMF, encouraging the work of all the other Black lobby groups, that the work has not yet even begun. And in the words of the founding president of the BMF, Babu Eric Mafuna, he says, what we've done in the past 45 years is just to take the first step. And our duty as successive generations is to take that forward. All they have done is take the first step. And as I close, here's one of my favorite quotations from my father, and he says, the new economic dispensation should match the aspiration for economic freedom and the fulfillment of the highest ideals of our democracy. Close quote. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for supporting the BMF, supporting the trust, not only through the lectures, but through your presence and through the work of the BMF. May we continue to play our role, and let us not leave the BMF as members, but continue as the foot soldiers where we have been placed to continuously drive these ideals. And that is why we need to continue to self-reflect when we think about Pradon Mkhwanazi, we think about Lot Ndlovu, think about Eric Mafuna, we think about George Nakota, we think about so many of our stalwarts who are with us and those who are not with us. There is a reason why we do these things, and not just to talk, but to self-reflect and to check how far we are in terms of the ideals that we've signed up for. Thank you very much, Program Director. Thank you, His Excellency.
Thank you very much, Monde. I knew you would deliver. So really, we did get quite a lot from that, believe it or not. And, you know, as you were speaking, I was reminded of a quote by Robin S. Sharma, who says, leadership is not about a title or a designation. It's about impact, influence, and inspiration. And tonight, as we are here, it is that impact that your father would have had on so many and even generations yet unborn, for him to have a vision that, you know, he knew was going to outlive him. And I can tell you now, as Nolita is posting on the chats there, that your father has a lot to be proud of, where, you know, he is laying seriously. He has a lot to be proud of when we look at you. And another person I'd like to acknowledge is the former president, Umzwanele Manyi. Thank you for joining us. I know that you were not acknowledged, but certainly you are not going unseen. We do acknowledge your presence. And Monde, thank you so much for really leaving us with that. And tonight, a lot of us are going to really log off, but we are challenged. Yes, we are finding ourselves in a difficult moment in our country. What do we do about it? How do we take on this baton of a leader who not only spoke, but walked the talk? How many of us would actually quit our jobs to follow an ideal, a vision that we know is going to outlive us? Certainly tonight, we really have a lot to think about. And I must say that as we are reflecting on this huge life, this impact that was then made, I'd like us to really finish off with words that I borrowed from Mr. Ruel Khoza, who delivered the lecture in 2016. He says, wisdom begins in wonder. Shall we, in memory of Maduke Lot Ndlovu, wonder? Wonder about the plight of our nation. Wonder about our national vision. Wonder about what our generation will bequeath to posterity. Wisdom begins in wonder. And that, ladies and gentlemen, concludes our business of this evening. Thank you so much for joining us for this 8th annual lecture. I'm certain you are all challenged, and I am as challenged tonight, and really to honor His Excellency, the former President Kgalema Motlanthe. Thank you so much, sir, for taking your time to really be with us this evening. Babu Wiseman Gutlu, we're not taking this lightly. When we are joined by people like yourselves, we know that we can only drink from the well of life and continue to really do what we do best. Mam Shelly Machaba, thank you so much for your time. President Andile Nomlala, DP Tasneem Fredericks, thank you so much for your time. Monde, we certainly do appreciate all that you've done for your father. With that, have a good evening.